Hello and thanks for tuning in again. Today's lesson we're going to be looking at apertures, which is probably the most difficult part of a camera setting in manual to understand, and even if you use an automatic or some other setting on your camera, it's probably the one that you're going to struggle with the most. An aperture is the hole in a lens which we can actually change in settings, so we can decide how much light we let in at any given time. Okay, so it is relatively simple, but the reason it gets complicated is because the numbers are back to front, which we'll get to in a bit, and also because it actually affects several things all at once. So if you've been looking at apertures or wondering what all the numbers mean, here's a little sheet which I'll probably put on the screen for you as well to try and get your head around it. But basically it breaks down like this. You may have heard of people saying about a large aperture. Okay, that just means that there's a large hole in the lens for all of that light to come flooding through. And a small aperture over here just means that it's a smaller hole, so less light can get through at any given time. However, this is where people get complicated, okay? Because this over here, this large aperture, okay, is given a number 2.8, okay? And this one over here, I'm reading it back to front, but I'm guessing that's f22, okay? So quite a lot of people misunderstand a large hole for a large number, okay? But all you need to think about is the smaller the number, the more light you're letting in, and that's my little cheat sheet to help me understand, okay? So allowing more light in with a smaller number, less light in with a bigger number, okay? Now, the way that these numbers work, and on your camera, as you just flick through all your settings, you'll see these numbers, and they exist for a reason. Okay, so if we have a little look, f4 allows in half as much as 2.8, okay? 5.6 lets in half as much light as f4, etc, 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 okay? But again, as you've probably figured out, I teach by doing and by experiment, so don't worry too much about the numbers, but that is a little bit about the maths bit, okay? You don't massively need to know the numbers because we're going to play around and see what happens, and hopefully you'll understand like I do from doing rather than just theory and getting bombarded by numbers which don't actually make any sense. So as you can see, we've got some vintage cameras here lined up. We're going to have a little look at the side effects of what happens when we use different apertures. So just a little note, I'm photographing on a fixed lens, which means that it's only got one focal length, okay? So I photograph on, at the moment, a 35mm. If you've got a zoom lens, which means you can zoom all the way into whatever, I would encourage you to do it as wide as possible and then zoom in and try again, because the more you zoom in, the more exaggerated this gets. So have a little experiment and see what happens, and again, hopefully it's a fun experiment for you to try and get to know your camera more and why it does what it does. Okay, so here we are, and all you need to do for this little experiment is to line up several objects in a row behind each other, okay, and get your camera nice and in the middle, and you can have a play around. As you can see, at the moment I'm on 400th of a second at f1.4, so that's as much light as my camera will let in, okay, and my ISO is at 1000, just so hopefully later on I don't have to change it that much for this video. So, I mentioned before about having side effects of what we press, okay? So, all I'm going to do at 1.4, which remember is a lot of light coming in, I'm going to focus on this front camera and take a photo. And if I have a look, we can see this camera's in focus, but the others aren't. Okay, so now, if I come back and I focus on the middle camera, the third camera, Olympus trip, and finally the brownie camera, if we actually go have a little look, we can see that this is in focus, nothing else. That one's in focus and either side isn't. This one's in focus and either side isn't, and back to the start, okay? So just experiment focusing on different things, okay? That's all you need to do. And as you can see, the focus is shifting, Okay, so this is called depth of field. So the depth of field is how much is in focus at any given time. Okay, and it's a really crucial thing as photographers to understand this. So if I went all the other way and changed it to, let's go to f16 as far as we can, and I change the shutter speed to be, wow, we're at 1/3 of a second, okay? If I focus on the front one and take a photograph, we can see that they're all in focus, and so are the doors. In fact, everything's in focus, okay? So you need to remember this and think about this just in future, and like I say, you'll learn from experimentation, okay? Just that the smaller the hole, the more that's going to be in focus. So again, we can bring this back down to, let's go for 2.8, okay? And we'll go through each of those stops, and you'll see that I'm starting to do this balancing act that I previously spoke about, okay? So that looks quite well exposed to me. If I click on the middle one at 2.8, it's starting to be a little bit more in focus, but they're still pretty out. So from 2.8, we said twice the amount was f4, and we can see that this now changed to f4, but again, because I've made less light come in, I need to make it take a photograph for longer, okay? Because remember, it's a balancing act between all of our settings. So if we go and have a look, again, it's starting to get more in focus between the cameras. So twice as less light, 5.6. And again, I need to change that balancing act to make sure it's as bright as the others. And if we go have a look, again, it's starting to get more and more in focus. So again, twice as much, we're going to be at f8. And again, it's too dark now because we're restricting how much light comes in. So we need to let more light in. And now if we go have a look, okay, we can see that they're all starting to get into focus. So again, from here, f11 would be next, but again, it's too dark. So I need to bring it up. And again, if we have a little look, okay, we can start to see that more things are going to be in focus. Now the sun's actually just come out, so we can see it's too bright in the background. So again, I can make it take the photo for less time just by changing the shutter speed. And now that's much better, a much more balanced image. So it's all that balancing act that you need to think about is, first of all, how do you want it to look? What do you want to be in focus or not? And then you need to make everything else balance around that. But again, if you just play around, see what happens and go from there, okay? You'll honestly just have loads of fun and see what happens, okay? So we can go all the way back between all of the photos and just see how it's changed across all of them between your focus. So just play around with that, okay? So hopefully you'll enjoy that little experiment, and fingers crossed you'll play around. I mean, if you've got some vintage cameras crack on, you could use flowers, you could use anything, really. Anything that you got lying around. Even toilet roll if you really wanted, although that's probably worth more than gold right now. So have a play around and see what happens. It's really honestly easy. Like I say, I don't massively want to get into the boring numbers and make it an absolute geek fest. I just want you guys to enjoy and understand in a native way how your camera works and how to get what you want. Ideally through play and experiments like this. So hopefully you've learned a little bit today. So in the next video, we're going to look at ISO. So if you want to subscribe, feel free. Also subscribe to my mail list, and there's going to be some goodies in there sometime soon as well.